Hi, everyone. We're so excited to have you with us today. My name is Michaela Perry, and I am the Farm to Institution New York State Training Coordinator with the American Farmland Trust. And I'm here with my colleagues, Ashley Raymer and Stephanie Shu. And this program is part of the Farm to Institution New York State program, which is a collaborative effort led by the American Farmland Trust. We just call it finesse. So if you hear finesse throughout this session today, that's what we're talking about. And this workshop in particular is part of our annual New York State Farm to School Institute, which is a year-long professional development program for school teams around New York State, where we offer coaching, workshops, a kickoff retreat in August, and just professional development opportunities, as well as an award. If you know anyone, or if you yourself are working at a school that is hoping to launch a farm to school program or refine your farm to school program, and this includes early childhood education programs as well, Ashley will drop the link in the chat shortly, and you can click on that link and see the application. We have a webinar that should tell you more about how to apply and what we look for in school teams. But if you are interested in pushing along your farm to school program, this is an opportunity we're very excited about to offer around the state, and applications are due March 15th. So if you have any questions about that, just feel free to ask them in the chat. And lastly, before we get started, this session will be recorded. It's being recorded right now. And so after the workshop, we will send around emails to everyone who registered. If for some reason you have to end early, you will get that recording available to you. And it will also be on Poughkeepsie Farm Project's YouTube channel as well. So with that, I am very, very pleased to hand this over to Jamie Levato. Jamie, over to you.
Thanks, Michaela. Hi, everyone. I'm Jamie from Poughkeepsie Farm Project, and I'm going to be facilitating this session today on how to start and sustain a successful school garden. And I'm really glad that you all decided to join today. I wanted to just tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the education director at Poughkeepsie Farm Project. I've been there for a little bit more than 10 years doing this work on educational gardening, among other related educational activities. I am a New York State certified elementary school teacher by training. I also have a master's degree in literacy education, and I started gardening as a small child with my family and continued when I was in college at a community garden, and then at home since I have had a home. So I have a backyard garden, and then I also work with educational gardens in Poughkeepsie. Just want to give a quick outline of our time together today. So we're going to start with some introductions. We're going to talk a little bit about research on garden-based learning, and then do a review of the steps that are laid out in the handout that Ashley emailed to everybody earlier today. If you have that handout and are able to print it, that you can just take notes right onto it, or you can just download it at another point and use that as your resource. But that's available to you, and we're going to use that as the framework for the second part of our time together. So this is an overhead shot of Poughkeepsie Farm Project, and you can see our farm fields surrounded by an ecological preserve. We are a farm-based nonprofit organization, and we operate on the ancestral homeland of the Munsee, Lenape, and Mohican peoples. And if you know of the land that you are living or working on and you want to share that in the chat, please feel free to do so. I also just want to recognize the stolen or undercompensated labor of people who came before us, whether on this land or surrounding land in New York and throughout the country, and the ways in which that stolen and undercompensated labor has benefited. So the mission of Poughkeepsie Farm Project is to cultivate a just and sustainable food system in the Mid-Hudson Valley, and we do that in a number of ways. We grow food for our community on about 15 acres of land. We work to increase access to healthy food in a variety of ways, including subsidized CSA shares, emergency, donations to emergency food providers, as well as a variety of other methods, including working with community members directly to provide food at free meal distributions and through some of our education programs as well, which brings me to the third way that we do our work, which is education programs. One way of educating is working with folks like you all, providing professional development opportunities, but we also provide education about food farming and food justice to children, teens, and adults, as well as families in Poughkeepsie and then in the surrounding areas. And then, of course, we do a bit of statewide and sometimes national level work in this arena. So I'm going to ask everybody to just take a moment to do a little introduction. For everybody who came on a little earlier, we did ask everybody to just take a moment and update your name on your little square. And so if you haven't gotten a chance to do that already, just hover over your little square and click on the 3 dots and just rename yourself to your name. So that way, when you type into the chat, it is reflecting who you are, as opposed to, I know sometimes folks have like computer number 1 or your organization name or your school name in there. So if you haven't done that already, go ahead and update that. And then what I'm going to ask everybody to do is to type into the chat your position or role, your organization, school or farm, and your location. And if you want to share it with the group, you can also feel free to share your email address, or share that at another time, or don't share it at all, of course, whatever is most comfortable to you. And this will just help us all get a sense of who's in the room, what's our geographic scope, and what kinds of roles and positions that people are coming from. So I am seeing that we've got a few people starting to put stuff in. Got, of course, a variety of educators, a lot of folks from New York, which is logical. We've got somebody here from Connecticut. So just keep putting those in, and we'll have a nice sense of who we are as a group. So because I'm sharing my screen and you're seeing the presentation, I just want to invite you to, if you would prefer, feel free to turn your video off. It can improve your quality of view because sometimes it just uses a little extra bandwidth, so feel free to turn it off for the time being. I'm going to do the same, and then I'll turn it back on when we are in the Q&A, because I'll stop sharing screen so we can see each other's faces a little bit more. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And okay, so let's get started. And thank you all for sharing who you are and where you're coming from. So we are all here because we're excited about getting started with school gardening. And this first part that I'm going to be talking about is actually adapted from Cornell University, and it is the research on garden-based learning. And it's just going to be a brief summary. I'm going to talk about a few studies and some of those benefits, and this I hope can help you in thinking through what you might want to do. So the first thing I want to ask is, what do you think some of the benefits of school gardening are? So you decided to join this for a reason. You're excited about school gardening. what are some of those benefits you're hoping that the students you engage with will get from the work that you're hoping to do? And I'm going to just read a few that are coming through. Shirley says, fun, math skills, ecology, raising food, increased knowledge of where food comes from, improved academic achievement, sense of pride. Enjoy nature, community involvement. Connection to food. So we've got a lot, oh, science, that's a big one. And here, this is an important one too, right? Increased willingness to try new foods from the garden. So there are lots of benefits to school gardening, and we're going to talk about what some of the research shows. So there have been numerous studies conducted on the benefits of gardening with students, and the research has been overwhelmingly positive with some specific and very clear outcomes for students and for schools. And so what you're seeing here is some that are specifically talking about academics, and I'm going to go into some of those details next. So the biggest area of study related to school gardening or educational gardening is science. And there have been positive effects for students who took part in garden programs about increasing positive attitudes about environmental issues. A study out of Louisiana showed that weekly use of gardening activities and hands-on classroom activities helped improve science achievement test scores. There was a survey of 300 teachers who shared that they saw significant gains in students in responsibility, cooperative behaviors, enthusiasm, interest, initiative, and love for plants and science, environmental awareness and concern, understanding of life science concepts, science processes, problem solving, math skills, pride, confidence, self-esteem, and language arts skills. So lots of benefits. Now, it was primarily looking at science, but they also added in several other questions that they wanted to find out about. So there's a huge amount of study on science, which I think is often one of the first go-to things we think of. But there's also been some research on the math, and math also has some substantial positive outcomes, and they have primarily been found in the areas of geometry, algebraic equations, probabilities, data analysis, and measurement. And you see in this photo here, this is actually a picture of a student planting in a coordinate plane that we set up at one of the educational gardens at our site at the Poughkeepsie Farm Project farm. We also have educational gardens there. And so this image comes from there. In English language arts, there are also some important outcomes. So this is just one example of a study. In this study, they found that in addition to gains in ELA performance, students also had more positive attitudes towards school after engaging in garden-based learning. So it had both ELA gains as well as connection to their school. Here's another one, nutrition, that I think is one of those go-to ones that we often think of automatically. And I want to share a little research project that we actually did at Poughkeepsie Farm Project related to our farm to school program there. And what we did is we had students that were engaged in our farm to school program and students who weren't. And the students who were engaged in the farm to school program had the opportunity to plant kale, harvest kale, cook kale, and do several other activities. And we compared their kale consumption at school lunch with students who had not been engaged. And what we found was, of the students who participated in the program, 63% of them had empty cups, which means they finished their serving of kale, compared to our 2 control groups, which had 8% empty cups and 1% empty cups, respectively. We also measured by weight, and the students engaged in the program actually ate 5 times as much kale by weight as the students who were not engaged in the program. We also, I'm sorry, this is not us, but other folks, actually several different studies have found similar things, and specifically that students have shown more positive attitudes towards fruit and vegetable snacks and improved in a higher preference for vegetables overall. In addition, there are, this is a little bit more not as specific to a subject area, but that the engagement in learning and a deeper quality and meaningfulness of the learning was found in one study as well. So I thought that was an important thing to also share. And then enhancing students' lives. Multiple studies have shown benefits to family relationships, other relationships, and family involvement with schools. Studies have also shown that upper elementary and middle school students developed better interpersonal relationship skills after participating in school gardening. All right, so we are going to get started working on our planning worksheet. So if you have that with you, now's the time to take it out so you can jot down your notes in there. And before we get started on that, I am gonna have us do like a quick little Zoom poll, and we're going to find out about your goals here. Are you looking to start a new garden or revitalize an existing garden? So go ahead and submit your response to that poll, and then I think once we're all submitted, our results will pop up and we'll get a sense. So one person asked, how do we access the worksheet? The worksheet was attached to the email that was sent around midday today. So if you check that email from Ashley, it was attached, and it is also in the chat. So can go ahead and grab that. Okay, so I think everybody can see the results. We have 36% are looking to start a new school garden, and 64% are looking to revitalize an existing school garden. And so what that tells me is 64% of the folks here already have some experience, probably have experienced some challenges, have experienced some successes. And I would say even the folks who are looking to start a new school garden might have already started other school gardens or done educational gardening elsewhere. So I think we have a lot of wisdom in the room, and I'm going to be asking you all to share that with each other throughout the rest of our time together, making substantial use of the chat. And because we do have such a large group, we're going to not be engaging so much vocally, but more through the chat. Just and also because we will be able to have the chat downloaded and sent to you all, so that way you'll have all of that information handy whenever you want to use it. Okay, so what I like to think of as step one is connecting with your colleagues. So you want to identify a core group of educators that you're going to work with. So in your worksheet or on a piece of paper or wherever you would like to be writing, think about and list the people who are or could be on your school garden team. And you can obviously name them by actual names of people that you actually know, or you can think of them as roles of people that would be the right people to find out who they are and get them engaged. If you have ideas that you want to share with the group, just feel free to just drop those ideas into the chat. Some suggestions that I would like to share with you that I think have been really valuable in my experience and in experiences of my colleagues are school nurses, teaching aides, teaching assistants, secretaries, custodians, and administrators. I think oftentimes the ideas for school gardening may come from teachers or sometimes outside organizations, but having a strong team of colleagues that are at that building can be really important. And I also want to suggest thinking about people who you engage with who might have an interest or are already doing something related. So you might know of a teacher who maybe isn't into gardening, but maybe always does a project on, starting a bean seed, or there's a science program that one of the grade levels does that has something to do with plants. And maybe they're not avid gardeners, but there's like a way that they might be able to get engaged and connected. And so I think kind of thinking about all of the little ways that people might be able to engage is an important starting point. So next is, I think, a really key thing to keep in mind at the beginning and ongoing, because your goals for the garden are really what is going to determine most things about your school garden. So what are your intentions? So I have identified some common goals of school gardens here on the screen and in your handout. What are some of yours? Write yours down on your worksheet. And if you have like a number one goal, I would say if you could share that in the chat so the rest of our group here can see what goals you have for the garden you're hoping to start or revitalize. And I'll share that in the gardens that I have worked with, there have been a variety of different goals. A lot of times it's family connection. Sometimes it has been having a tasting garden. And I'm noticing here increased food security for students' families, promoting healthy eating habits, appreciation of nature, connecting to the curriculum. So as you can see, these all really tie well in with what the research shows. So you have that ability to really connect your goals to what the research shows. And so that's really important. So if you're starting a new garden, or if you are trying to revitalize a garden, you may need to get some sort of approval from, whether that's from a school principal, a department head, or the school board. And so developing your rationale based on both the research and your garden goals is an incredibly valuable thing to do. So the next step is to begin to craft your rationale that you can present to whoever you might need to get approval from, or you might want to do it as a way to promote it amongst PTA members, families, the community, so that way you can get a strong swell of support around this project. So think about the ways in which you are going to meet your goals with the garden, and think about how you might want to present that to the people you might present it. So it could be you're going to do a PowerPoint presentation at a board meeting, or it might be you're going to have a small group meeting with a school principal and provide, a document to that person. So, think about what you think would be most effective for the approvals or the support gathering that you might need. And next up, we have create your support network. So before we were talking about identifying potential members of your garden team. And so those are the folks that are like in your school and they are right there with you starting from scratch. But now I want you to think about who's going to support that team, who's going to help to make this garden successful. And you're going to think of, it could be other people in your school building, but it could also be community members, people with outside expertise, folks who maybe might be a local farmer. Or one of the groups that I have found to be particularly helpful in school gardens is families that live next door or across the street or around the block to the school, because they are really local and they often are able to take on a garden care role during school breaks. And so having some local neighbors, even if they don't have children in the building, I think that connecting with some of those school building neighbors is a really valuable method of getting, building your support network. Also, while you're seeking members of your support team, you might want to think about some creative methods of outreach that can draw people in who might be otherwise, not as likely to participate. So maybe having an event or having a little tour of the place where the garden will be, or having some sort of game-like activity, but something that maybe will excite people into joining in. So I know many of you are looking to revitalize a garden, but I do want to just touch on selecting your garden site, because for folks who are starting new, this is a really important piece. So you have a lot of considerations to make here. A key one is the number of hours of sunlight. You want to have 6 to 8 hours of sunlight or more if possible. One of the biggest challenges gardens that we've been engaged with have faced is access to water. So that's a really key issue to think about. Is there an outdoor spigot? Is there the possibility of running pipes? Is that something that the school district can pay for? Can a grant cover that? Is it possible to just run a hose? Is there a shed nearby that you can put a rain barrel under? So just thinking about water. Some schools might not have a schoolyard or an open grassy area, and you can actually start a school garden on pavement and just build raised beds right on top of the pavement. So that is definitely an option that is worth considering. In fact, one of the most successful school gardens that we work with is on pavement, and it's actually the school garden that was in the opening photo of this presentation. In this photo, you see actually some teenagers helping out with some soil testing, and we worked with actually a college professor at Vassar College to get this site tested for lead and other heavy metal contamination. And that was a very educational experience for our team, because lead is very spotty. So although we sampled many different spots, we basically laid out a grid on the ground and took samples from many different spots in the soil. What we found was that there could be a spot that had lead contamination, and 2 inches away, no trace of lead whatsoever. So what it told me is it's more important to think about and to learn about the history of that piece of land and to just assume that the ground is contaminated in many cases, especially if you're in an urban area. You know, if you're in a rural area and you know that that place has never been a dumping ground and hasn't been close to a place that has been painted with lead and is not close to a road, you know, you're probably in a pretty good situation. But if you're in an urban area, I would say just assume the soil is contaminated and use raised beds, use a barrier, bring in clean soil. And then another really key piece for safety is making sure the surface of the soil between the beds and surrounding the garden space is covered in some way. So it can be covered in grass, it can be covered in a thick mulch, you know, you could have pavement, but that you don't want there to be open soil because that soil can dust up into the air and actually kind of get on top of your garden beds. So think about, you know, visualize your space, your options, and think about where might be a good spot for your garden. Or if you are going to be expanding, it might be you need to expand in one direction or another based on some of the site needs. So next we're going to talk about designing the garden. And I just want to point your attention to this image for a moment. This is actually in one of our educational gardens. And this is our sunflower circle. So it's actually a round garden space with a grassy center. And it is a really fun area where the kids can be kind of enclosed in a circle of sunflowers. And it's a nice area to sit and do a lesson inside of, especially for a small group. So that's just one little idea that's in the image. But think about the areas that you want to have in your garden and what they will help you achieve. So you're really gonna go back to your goals again here and think about, you know, what kinds of things you want to be growing in broad categories here, and how you might want to lay that out. And I want you to think for a moment about the other educators in your building who may not be, they might not be gardeners, they might not feel comfortable touching the dirt. And I definitely have experienced that in a variety of the schools we work with, there are educators who are like, we want to engage in the school garden, but we don't want to actually garden. And so think about what are the ways in which that's possible and what kind of garden spaces might you need. So for example, maybe a class wants to come in and just observe the garden and take measurements. Maybe a class wants to do their reading groups in the garden, or maybe an art class wants to draw or paint things that are growing in the garden. And so if you wanted to do things like that, what are the needs that you would have for that space? Maybe, maybe you need benches. Maybe you need, you know, a meeting area. Maybe you want to make sure you're growing certain things that are going to be for a recipe. So, you know, for example, if one of your goals is to improve family relationships, and maybe you want to have a section of the garden that's focused on crops from student backgrounds. So thinking through what are some of those ideas that would work well in your garden based on the space that you have. So then you're going to work on developing your plan. So you're going to kind of take your previous sections, your design ideas, and then transfer that into your crop plan. So what are the actual plants that you want to grow? And there's a lot. I'm not going to go too much into detail about creating a crop plan because that could be like a whole series of workshops on crop planning. But just to start at least thinking about what crops you would want to grow. And I want to ask everybody to write into the chat, what is one crop that you definitely, absolutely want to grow in this garden? And maybe a reason why you would want to grow that. So I'm going to just give a couple of examples. So for example, if one of your goals is to develop positive attitudes towards the environment, you might want to consider native plants that attract pollinators. So the students can have that experience of seeing the pollinators, and you can teach lessons about that. And give them those experiences. If maybe you want to connect with the community and do a fall harvest festival, so you would want to select fall ripening crops that could be served at that event. So maybe winter squash. So I am going to just read some of the beautiful ideas you are typing in. So I see salad greens, noodle beans, tomatoes for taste, cherry tomatoes for quick snacking. You know, I think that's really important. When you have a small garden, often you end up with more of a tasting garden than a production garden. So having those things that are easy to just taste right there in the garden are really wonderful. Radishes, because they mature quickly and they're colorful. And also I would say harvesting roots is always a bit magical for the children. So that's a beautiful one. More excitement about tomatoes, Three Sisters. Lettuce, since they're easy to serve in the cafeteria. Peas, because fresh peas taste awesome compared to frozen or canned. So true. Spinach and kale. Green leafy vegetables, sorry. Swiss chard, because it's quick. Sunflowers. Herbs, because most are perennials. That's a really wonderful consideration, because perennials can be really your friend in the school garden, because they come back, they're there early, they last long, and sometimes if you don't have a summer program, you have to be really thoughtful about what you plant, because you don't have as much ability to necessarily care for it in the summer. Cucumber melon, because they're weird. Oh, weird stuff is so great in the garden, absolutely. Squash, so kids can see the entire plant life cycle. Food's easy to serve in the cafeteria. Collards and kale, because they keep producing through the summer and late into the fall, early winter. Yes. Sweet potatoes, because they are exciting to harvest. Yes, you know, I think having that joy and excitement is such a key part of growing a school garden. And I love you all sharing all of these ideas. So next up on our worksheet is identifying your supply and funding needs. So whether you're starting new or revitalizing an existing garden, you are probably going to need some supplies. So you might want to use lumber or garden bed kits. You might want to have a rain barrel. You might need to bring in soil or mulch. We have found that although at first we thought we didn't really need fencing in the school gardens because many of them were in schoolyards already, we found that the deer, you know, they find the space to get in. So even though, because the fencing doesn't go fully around the area entirely, even though we're in an urban area, the deer are just running around and trying to eat all the vegetables. So we found that we really did need to to get fencing in many of these school gardens. And then going back to what we were talking about before, a water source. So if you do need to run pipes or buy hoses, do you want to have benches or shaded picnic tables so students can do some of their reading or lessons outside? And I want to encourage you all to think about what are the local businesses that might be able to donate or offer discounts. There are many seed companies that like to donate their seeds. And then later on, the last page of the handout actually has a variety of seed companies and also several listings of grant opportunities. And so each of those links that you'll see there actually has a whole list of grant opportunities. And then you can also do garden fundraisers to, to raise some of those funds. So just start jotting down what you think some of your materials might be. If you have an existing garden, you might even decide that you want to add some large pots to your garden, right? So instead of doing like new garden beds, maybe you want to get some of those big half-barrel pots to intersperse to get a little more growing space. And I noticed somebody typed in, we are using pallet wood trying to make the garden out of upcycled materials. That is a great idea. I would just say that pallet wood is probably wood that is going to decay pretty quickly. Now, we have built most of the school garden beds with kits from Natural Yards, which are cedar, and even those have decayed pretty substantially in about 6 years. So I think, thinking through some ideas for maybe putting like a little plastic barrier between the soil and the wood can help make wood last longer because it has less interaction with the microorganisms that are breaking it down. Yes, and we have somebody who added in, make sure that the pallets don't have chemicals. However, if you don't know, just make sure you put a barrier so that the soil is not coming in contact. Same thing, if you end up saying like, you know what, we have to use pressure treated, just put a barrier so that way the soil and your food plants are not coming into any contact with that, with the wood. What type of plastic? That is something that I would need to look into a little bit more. I would say probably a non-porous ground cover, but I can't give you like a brand name or a product name at the moment. Okay, so let's go to our next topic. Use the garden to enhance instruction. So this is basically putting into practice all of the things that you have been preparing for. And so, you're actually doing the first thing on the list already, which is attending trainings and workshops, and then sharing what you learned with your colleagues. And you're actually even doing that right now as you type into the chat with all of your brilliant ideas. And there's a list later in the handout for a variety of entities that provide trainings and workshops. I also included a web page on our website that has a bunch of curricular resources that you can use and adapt. I do want to just touch back on an issue that has come up in my experience at some of the school gardens. So oftentimes a school garden is established by a person like you, right? So somebody who's excited, they might be a school teacher, they're really motivated to get it going. And sometimes it ends up being thought of as that person's project. And out of respect, other colleagues might say, they might step back from it. They might say, you know what, I don't want to go out into the garden because that's so-and-so's project and, I don't want to mess anything up. And so this is something that I've experienced at many of the schools, that it's really just educators trying to be thoughtful and considerate of each other. But because everybody's so busy and stressed out a lot, that there's not that like, okay, let's have a system. Let's make this garden a space for everybody to enhance their instruction. So I think just kind of thinking about some of those challenges and how to prevent them or alleviate them can be really worthwhile. And I'll mention a few ideas in a little bit. And if you have the opportunity at faculty meetings to share some of the stuff that you're learning and thinking of, that's a really effective way of doing it if you're allowed the time for that. And then just in terms of your notes, I would say jot down some of the lessons you would want to teach. So that way you can either find things to adapt, or of course you can develop them yourself. So, okay, check out this photo. You'll see two teachers in the foreground who are working in this garden, and behind them you will see a weedy mess of very overgrown grass. So this is what can happen if you don't have a plan to maintain the garden. So this photo actually is several years old, and it's at, we usually hold a summer institute, and as part of that, we usually give some garden care to a school garden that needs a little extra love. And so in terms of maintaining the garden, it's really important to think about how to make that be a smooth process. So one way is to have a garden club. So it could be a group of students that this is their club, this is their thing, and they meet, I don't know, 2 days after school, and that's when the garden gets maintained, gets weeded, gets mulched, gets cared for in that way. It could be that it's something that happens with a certain grade level, or a certain class is in charge of it every week or every month or something along those lines. It could be something that is a responsibility of staff, or that there is a staff member whose job it is to maintain the garden. I know that in Red Hook, they have a system by which they have a garden teacher, and that teacher has substantial responsibility in caring for that garden, but then it actually functions as a special. And you know, that might be a hard thing to do in a school, but if you're able to get your school garden as a special, that is one way that you can ensure that that garden has longevity, because it's something that's built into the schedule. It's built into how the school runs. You know, there's PE, there's music, there's art, there's library, and there's garden class. So that's something that I think in some cases might be ambitious, but if you're able to advocate for that, I think it would be incredibly valuable, and one of the things that can create real staying power for the garden. You can develop, you know, a schedule and a system by which people sign up to bring their classes down. So there are a variety of options, you know, maybe volunteers, maybe those school building neighbors, but that's a really key thing to just have some brainstorming start and think about how you're going to solve that. There are also some sites, I think Sign Up Genius is a website that you can use to have volunteers sign up for shifts. And so that way there's just like, you post the shifts and people sign up for them, and they maybe have a little training where they know what their responsibilities are. And maybe during school breaks in summer, they work in the garden and they get to also take home the harvest. I don't think I'm going to comment on the chickens right now, because that's not something I have any expertise in whatsoever. But I do want to say that, yes, PTA is a great connection. So thank you for sharing that, Marion. Okay. And let's talk about sustaining the garden. So this is, I kind of touched on some of this a moment ago, but thinking about how do you make your school garden an integral component of the school in terms of both curriculum and school culture. So that way, nobody in your school or community could possibly imagine that that school would exist without that garden. It's just like an assumed feature. It wouldn't be like something that could ever go by the wayside. So one idea is to make sure your important events either are held in the garden or involve a garden tour or engage with the garden in some way. So I want you to take a moment to think about what are some key school special events that you could hold in or near your school garden or connect to your garden in some way. The garden is part of parent-teacher night. Yes. Open house, parent-teacher conferences. You know, I really even like the idea of school concerts. Can the school garden somehow be connected to school concerts? Maybe there's a quartet that does a little show in the school garden, you know, before things start as like a little preview, or you know, just thinking about, is there an art exhibition and part of the art exhibition happens in the garden? So just thinking about what are the ways in which that garden can just be part of everything. And on a quick side note to that, I think the same is true if your school is doing a farm to school program, which I think many of you are doing. How do you make farm to school part of every event? How do you make, if there are going to be refreshments, the refreshments are farm to school, maybe from the garden, maybe from a local farm, right? But everything is just fully integrated. Ooh, tasting events. Yes, love that. Tasting, you know, one of the things that we actually did with our farm to school program in Poughkeepsie, I think back in 2014, is at all of the open houses, we had parents and the students taste the new recipes that we were proposing for the school meals. And so they got to vote on which ones they liked. And so that made it so that the adults were familiar with the recipes already and the kids had tasted them. And so once they got on the menu, everybody was excited about them. And if they weren't on the menu, they got disappointed. So really connecting, I think, both with the students and with their adults, their caregivers, is really, really key. I think another key to sustaining the garden is to provide the whole school and community with ideas and opportunities to engage in that space. So make it so that there's an avenue to get involved. And you know what that avenue is going to really depend on your school and your community and your garden. But you know, it could be that that's a space that is able to be reserved, so it like exists on the form that outside partners can you know, sign up if they want to try to reserve a space, and then there's like a little set of rules of what they're able to do and not do in that space. So just thinking about ways to really engage everybody in that space. And if everybody knows about it and feels welcome, they'll also be more likely to be invested and protective of the garden, right? So that's staff members, students, and families. If they feel deeply connected to it, you know, they're going to watch out for it. They're going to make sure if they are walking by and they see some weeds, they're going to pick them up. They're going to tell their friend, no, don't throw that soda can in there. You know, they're going to make sure that that is a space that is well loved and that it lasts and flourishes. So I am going to stop there for the presentation portion. And I want to I want to take some time to respond to questions and also ask you to, if you have a chance, just take a look. Actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I am going to turn my video back on, and feel free to turn your video back on if you would like to. And I'm going to invite everybody to type their questions into the chat. And I'm also going to ask you all some questions. So I listed a bunch of resources here, but I would love to know what your favorite resources are. So if you have some go-to resources that aren't on this list, and my list is brief. I tried to not make this handout too long, but please do share your favorite resources. And then I'd love to hear about some challenges that you have faced or questions that you have that I have not yet responded to. So go ahead and get those into the chat. Let's see. I think I didn't comment on some of these ideas. Oh, we have tastings during PTA meetings. That sounds great. Have it be part of a Harvest of the Month program. Salad celebrations for parents and classes, and a farmer's market. Oh, these are beautiful. Okay, so Master Gardeners is a resource that is being listed. So Master Gardeners can provide a lot of information and even some support in teaching folks how to garden. And they sometimes are even able to join your class and lead a program with you and your students. What they're not usually able to do is take care of the garden. So, so just, keep that in mind, that they're able to provide a lot of resources, but it's mostly around teaching. Okay, so let me read this question. How do you balance being excited about the possibilities of a new school garden and integrating with curriculum, with some teachers feeling overwhelmed with other commitments, other curriculum requirements, and hesitant to get involved? What a good question. Okay, so I'll just share about what I think some of the ideas that have worked for us have been. And some of it has been a little farm-based and some has been garden-based, but looking at the curriculum and making whatever needs to happen in the curriculum able to be done with the garden. So instead of it being in addition to what you already need to do and what your colleagues already need to do, make it that the garden is a more fun and exciting way to do that thing. So, so for example, our team of educators looked at the curriculum for several of the early elementary grades and learned about some of the themes in the ELA curriculum. And so one of the themes was inventions. And so we created a lesson and activity series that was related to George Washington Carver. It was about sweet potatoes. We can't do peanuts because oftentimes you can't do peanuts in schools, but sweet potatoes are delicious and you can grow them. And we had the students invent seed balls that they could get pollinator seeds into different areas by making these little seed balls. And then they also got to make a dish with sweet potatoes, and they also did some gardening, and then we also used In the Garden with Dr. Carver, the children's book, so it also had a literacy connection. So, and then when we ran that program with the teachers, there was like such a sense of relief, not only in what they said to us, but in their faces and body language during those lessons, because they were imagining that it was going to be in addition, but they then were like, oh, this is stuff that I had to teach anyway. You're teaching the concepts. Now, I know we are an outside organization, but you can do that in some ways for your colleagues. You can say, like, look, I developed this lesson plan that hits on all of the topics that we need to work on this week or this month or in this unit. And, you know, here you can have it, and this is how I did it, and these are the supplies I used. So I think making it easy and making it not something in addition. I see somebody wrote Math in the Garden is a great resource. Yes, we've definitely used that. There are a lot of really fun lessons in there, and I think we might have a couple of them that are downloads on the, where is it? On the handout that I provided. I think there's a link to lessons on here, although I don't see it on my printout right now. If it's not there, I will send it your way after the session. Okay. How do you assuage fears of tick bites, wasp stings, and other insect-human interactions? That is a challenging one. I think that for ticks, one important thing to make sure is communicated to, I think this is just something that all schools and all organizations should be communicating anyway, which is if you're in a tick, you know, an area like we're in the Mid-Hudson Valley, I'm not sure exactly where you all are, but there are probably ticks there. If you go outside in the spring, summer, or fall, do a daily tick check. Just do it every day. If you have left the house, do your daily tick check. And if everybody gets into that habit, I think worrying about ticks in the garden isn't really the issue, because the garden is really not the most likely place you're going to get a tick. It's going to be, you know, it's like walking in tall grass somewhere, and being in places where there are mice running around, and you know, where there's some deer activity and where there aren't predators. So, you know, yes, any outdoor space that isn't fully paved is a potential risk, but I would say the garden is not like your number one risk. In fact, actually, like suburban areas, because the when the forest is like kind of cut up, that is one of the riskier places. Although, you know, your school might be in a suburb, so that could be a potentially risky area. So I would say just get a policy of everybody does their daily tick check before they go to bed. Wasp stings and other insect-human interactions, it's hard. It's really hard. We've had some kids get very, very upset about a fly. You know, just a fly. It's not even a mosquito, not a bee, not a wasp. But I would say, I think lessons, actually teaching about insects, teaching about the benefits of pollinators, about the ways in which plants and animals interact with each other, and that everybody has a role in the ecosystem. I think that can really help to understand that everybody has a place. And so, you know, the bees also belong there, and we just have to kind of leave them alone. And they will sometimes buzz around us, but they're not going to harm us if we're not making them scared. But it's definitely not easy, especially if you have young people that are not used to being outside and not, you know, engaging with small creatures that fly around them very much. So, oh, somebody listed, I did touch a bug lesson. You know, one thing similar to that we have done is done vermicomposting. So do a lesson where you introduce students to worms. and allow them to touch the worms and hold the worms, and make a worm composting bin for the classroom. That sometimes, even though it's worms and it's not flying insects, sometimes it's enough of a connection that the comfort level increases, because they like see the value in these small creatures. Nicole shares Wiggle Room LLC is a great resource for vermicomposting. So that sounds great. Other questions that folks have that we haven't touched on yet? Oh, no bugs, no chocolate. That's that's an important message. Is that a book title? I'm not familiar with that, but it's an important message. I definitely am a lover of chocolate. Well, I'm going to just take a moment to share a little bit about the section that's called Other Resources and Tips. So you'll see there's a list of different entities here, and each of those entities does offer workshops and professional development, and many of these are remote, like we're doing right here today. And a lot of them also have workshops that were webinars that are now available on their websites or on their Vimeo channel or on their YouTube channel. And you can just go and watch them and do that, at whatever time you are available. I see a couple more questions coming in. Hydroponics or microgreens? I cannot speak to hydroponics. I don't have experience in that, but I can talk about microgreens. We love teaching about microgreens. One of the things that had kind of frustrated me for many years is I feel like a lot of us educators had done programs where we sent kids home with a little seed in a little pot so they could grow something. And what they were growing was maybe a bean seed or a sunflower seed, but they went home and they put it on their windowsill. They didn't really have a place to plant it, and then it died, and they never got a sunflower and they never got a green bean. And so it just, that, you go to a festival, the kids get to plant something and take it home. And it just kind of always saddened me that we're not setting kids up for success in gardening when we give them these seeds to plant, but they never get the fruits of their labor. So we transition to if we're going to send kids home with something, if it's not like in a big enough pot that they could actually grow something like outside next to their front door or on their fire escape or whatever, that they're going to go home with microgreens. So we give them little trays filled with soil, and they just grow it for 7 to 10 days, and then they cut it. So we've done that actually both as a take-home project. We've done it actually quite substantially in 2020 because we didn't really do school gardening like we normally do. And then we also have done it as an in-class project. So it's a great winter gardening project when you're not going to be necessarily outside in the school garden. I think microgreens are great. You can, just keep doing another round after another round and have some great microgreens to sprinkle on top of whatever food you might be making. Toss them in a smoothie, put them on your sandwich. I think that's a wonderful thing that's very accessible, also very affordable. So I highly recommend microgreens. Are there any ways to evaluate and share how well the garden is working or its sustainability? Well, I would say definitely yes, but I think that it's not, I think that would need to be something that comes from the school. I mean, there might be a resource out there, but to know whether it's working, I think it really needs to be based on the goals that you have, right? So you have to determine what your goals are, and then you have to determine how you're going to evaluate whether you've met those goals. So I would say if you think about it like you think of a lesson plan, how do you evaluate whether the students learned the thing that you were intending to teach? And obviously it would be much expanded because we're talking about a garden, but you know, thinking about, you know, if your goal is to increase the students' taste for vegetables, one, you probably want to make sure you're having all of the students tasting vegetables and having them have certain experiences. So one way to evaluate that is to see, okay, are we actually providing these experiences? And then you need to measure, like, okay, the students had 7 experiences of tasting vegetables in the garden, for example, and then did that impact how they respond to vegetables? So you might need to do like a pre-survey and a post-survey or something along those lines. But I think it's important to think about what it is how you define success, how you define sustainability, and that's going to help you figure out how to measure it. I do have a webinar that I did for the USDA on evaluating your farm to school program. Now, it's not specifically about gardens, but it is about evaluation. So that's something that might give some tips, but it's definitely not specifically about gardening. It's about evaluating your farm to school program. But again, that could be helpful. Any tips for how to make a school garden team? I would say, you know, I don't know how many of you are currently in person or if you're doing remote learning, but if you're in person, I think the best thing is to just talk to all of your colleagues, talk to every person in your building and ask them for their advice, bring people in as partners from the beginning, and maybe don't always be so committed to just what your idea is, but like try to use this as an opportunity to allow the garden to be something that other people can get really excited about because it can help to meet their goals as well. Now, if you're fully remote, you know, I think it's much harder because I don't think your colleagues are going to necessarily want to read an additional email or might not have time for an additional phone call because it's just really hectic. You're not going to just like pass them in the hallway or something like that. So that might be a little bit more complicated, but still worth a try. And during normal times, you know, the in-person conversation I think is best. And then ask them, who else do you think would be interested? And, you know, reach out to any possible community partner you think might be interested. I know one of the Farm to School Institute school teams is a school, and one of their partners is actually the local hospital. And so that's a really interesting connection. I don't know exactly how much engagement the hospital has in the garden, and it's just that I'm not sure. But you know, sometimes your partnering organizations might not be what you would expect. Okay, let's see. Oh, can you share info about the USDA evaluation webinar? I can. I don't think I can do it at this moment, but we can send it in the follow-up email. All right. Does anybody want to add any additional questions while we're waiting for more questions to come in? I will just share about the funding opportunities. I think I mentioned this before, but each of these links that I put into the handout it's not just one grant, it's a list of grants, and some of them might overlap, but there are lots of opportunities for both starting and enhancing or continuing your school garden program. Also, I've found our local community foundation to be really valuable, as well as some local family foundations. And sometimes if you have a local grocery store chain, they can get pretty excited about school gardens. I know that one of the educators we've worked with has gotten multiple grants. She got one from Tractor Supply. I think she got one from Lowe's, one from Captain Planet, and I think one other one. But so there are a variety of opportunities out there, and a lot of food companies are offering this sort of thing. Do you have any resources for solitary bees? I don't have any lesson plans, but I know that we're actually right across the parking lot from the environmental cooperative at Vassar Barnes, and they have done some really great programming related to solitary bees, and actually some great projects where students can use like reeds to make like bee hotels, so that way the bees have a home for the winter and that sort of thing. But it's not an area that I have a lot of expertise in. So there's a question about the handout. If everybody who didn't see the handout, just check your email. It should be in your email box. Ongoing funding sources could be, oh yeah. So sometimes you can have like a restaurant or a company say that, you know, a store or something say, every purchase, we're going to donate, you know, 10% of every purchase on this day, and then your school can promote that, and then that can be a way that they provide a donation based on the sales that you were able to help drive to their location. And some of the schools we work with have done that sort of thing with a lot of success. So that's another great idea. I did want to also just share the seed sources that I list here. These are a bunch of seed sources, mostly New York State, but some outside of New York State. And they have really high quality seeds, but also a lot of these organizations have a little bit more of a mission to their work. And for example, True Love Seeds really works with a lot of seeds from different cultures around the world that are able to be grown here. So that way there's access to foods that you might not otherwise have access to. So they're a great source if you're looking for culturally relevant crops that you might not be able to find elsewhere. You have like Seed Savers Exchange, which they have their regular catalog, but also they have a yearbook, which has a seed exchange, which could be a fun project to get a school garden engaged in as well. Grow to Learn, New York City, and Green Thumb also give out seeds each spring and fall. And I do want to also invite everybody. I'm not sure if you saw all of the other workshops that we have coming up in a month. Basically 1 month from today, I'm going to be leading a workshop on multicultural children's literature in the garden. And so if you're interested in that, we'll send information in a follow-up email. And that is going to be a smaller group, so there'll be a little bit more engagement, and we'll have some breakout sessions in there. And you'll get exposed to some children's books that would be suitable for use in gardens. And we've done some specific research to build a list of multicultural children's literature on these topics, because many times in the bookstores, you don't see children of color in the books about gardening. So that's one that's coming up. And then we have a series of 3 3 workshops or 3 circles for educators that are self-care circles that are based on themes, natural themes, and Indigenous history and practices, agricultural practices. So I know some folks are hopping off the call. If there are other questions, I'm happy to respond. Or if you have other thoughts that you want to share, or stories, or tips or questions, please do drop those into the chat. Okay, Ashley put the link in for those workshops, for those self-care circles, so definitely check those out. I'm glad that you found the handout helpful. You know, please feel free to share it with your colleagues. Thank you all for being here on this call. I really appreciate the work that you're doing to bring gardening to young people. So thank you all for all that you do, and I just wish you lots of success and energy and healthy plants. I will say that if you're new to gardening, just please don't get discouraged when the plants die, because they will. You're gonna lose plants, and that's just part of, you're not gardening if you're not killing plants. Okay, so just don't worry, don't feel sad or bad if the plants die. They are going to, okay? Just keep going, and it's just all a learning experience. So again, thank you all for all that you do and for being here, and yeah, just wish you all the best with your gardens. Thank you.